it since the recording is on. So if any of you does not want to be identified, or please put your camera off and change your name so you remain anonymous throughout the whole recording. The recording will be available at the SCORAI website and at the Future Earth members portal. So that you know. And yeah, Valentina, off you go.
Yes, hello everybody. I'm very excited to see so many people. People are still coming in. Maybe Ginny, you want to write in the chat also, let people know that we are recording this session. And if anybody is not happy with that, then please let us know. It's in order to share it, like Ginny just said, for those who haven't heard it, to share this interesting session with those who cannot join today because of time differences. And yes, to get you started and to use this time most useful, we have prepared a little questionnaire because this is a worldwide network, our working group on communicating sustainable consumption and production and sustainable lifestyles is actually yes, related to Future Earth and SCORAI, which I will show in a second and tell you more about it for those who don't know it already. And we are from all around the world, and we spread this invite also in all of our networks. So if you please go into the chat now and tell us where you are joining from today. And please also share your name so we know who is here. I mean, we can see your name also in the little Zoom windows. But anyways, so I'm Valentina. I'm joining from Italy. And I'm curious where you're all joining from. Well, I also still have an eye on the people who are still joining. Yes, so we have people joining from the US, not just our speaker today. That's amazing because that's really early there. Yes. And from Portugal, from Germany, from New York City. Great. From the UK. And yeah, that's amazing. I would also like to you to share in the chat why you're here today. We have 5 hashtags that you can see, and it's cross-pollination, inspiration, networking, informing and bridging, incubating innovation, and sharing information about good and bad practices when it comes to sustainability communication. The one that speaks most to you, share it in the chat, and then you already also know what is at the heart of this working group and what our mission is, because it's those 5 things. Please share that, and then I'll go ahead and tell you more about what awaits us today. Thank you. Yes, just the hashtag that speaks most to you. Okay, we have Inform and Bridge from Sylvia Lorek, nice to have you here today. Kira, Inspiration and Networking. Cross-pollination from our speaker, Kira, from our speaker, Christina. Thank you. Yes, that sounds great. Thank you for taking part in this little interactive beginning. You will have more because it's a cross-pollination session, and you will have more opportunities to exchange. So you have just seen and read from each other. Who are we? We are co-chairs of this working group since the end of last year. Me, Valentina, my colleague Natalie, Ginny, you've already heard, and Stefan. And this group is all about communicating sustainable lifestyles effectively, and how can we change our behavior, our systems. What are communication constructions is what we look at, and also how can we empower ourselves and other people to become part of a sustainability transition based on behavior change in all of us. And speaking of behavior change, we had the incredible chance to meet Christina I had. I don't know if you know, but I have a farm in Italy where we try to put sustainable practices into action. And Christina was one of the international volunteers that came and shared her incredibly interesting insights from her research that she's doing at the Icahn School of Medicine at the Mount Sinai Hospital. Christina Maher, thank you so much for being here today and joining us and sharing some of your exciting insights from cognitive science to promote effective sustainability communication. And what will happen is that Christina will give us a 10-minute light bulb input where she shows a bit of her research insights that will hopefully intrigue us to then discuss some of the insights that we gained with mixed with our experiences on the topic in breakout sessions that will be 15 minutes long. You have to then have a chance to meet each other and ascribe a timekeeper for that session, introduce yourself again, and we might drop in as well to share the discussion. And then after that, there is harvest time. We will come back together into the main chat here in the main forum and discuss a 2-minute summary of what your breakout session was discussing. Yes, so having said all that, I would say I give the word to Christina.
Thank you. Okay, thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here. So I'll share some slides. Okay, so as Valentina very kindly introduced, I'm a neuroscience PhD candidate at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York. Here we go. And I just wanted to open with this quote. Valentina actually shared this book, Braiding Sweetgrass, with me. So a sheaf of sweetgrass bound at the end and divided into thirds is ready to braid. In braiding sweetgrass, that it is smooth, glossy, and worthy of the gift. A certain amount of tension is needed. Of course, you can do it yourself, but the sweetest way is to have someone else hold the end so that you pull gently against each other, all the while leaning in. Linked by sweetgrass, there's reciprocity between you. Linked by sweetgrass, the holder is as vital as the braider. I think this quote really encapsulates the importance of these kind of interdisciplinary sessions where I think we can truly glean some important insights from our more specialized subfields by coming together to share them. So I'm very happy to do that today. So as a cognitive neuroscientist, cognitive scientist, what is it that we do? So we're interested in how our experience with the world makes us who we are and how we respond to the information around us and how that influences our behavior. And to assess this kind of big idea, we combine games, so like card games and different game theory style paradigms, which help operationalize things like human learning, planning, and reasoning. And we combine these with techniques from machine learning and statistics, which help us quantify and assess these cognitive ideas. And sometimes we get the exciting opportunity to record neural activity from the human brain to understand how the machinery of our neural system supports these behaviors. And by combining these three techniques, we can leverage these tools to help us understand how our human experience makes us who we are. So I'll be sharing the work of 2 experiments, which I think are particularly relevant to this aim and to this group's interest in understanding how we respond to the information around us in the world. So the world has a lot of information. There's constant demands on our attentional resources, and this can be very overwhelming. So to make sense of the world, we pay attention to information that we think is important, and we ignore the rest. So my colleagues and I at Mount Sinai are interested in testing how do we decide what is relevant and how do we make choices that support us and our goals in a world that has a lot of information. So to do this, we gave neurosurgical participants a game. Each of these squares is a sequential screen that they saw on a laptop as they played this game. And the idea of this game is that there's 3 gems at any given time. And your goal to maximize the points that you earn is to figure out the characteristic of the gems that leads to reward most often, and then ignore the other characteristics. So in this case, maybe it's circle. So over time, people should learn that they should focus on the circular gems and ignore everything else about them. And here's a schematic of one of our neurosurgical patients playing this game while we are recording from electrodes across their brain to understand the cellular activity that's supporting their behavior during gameplay. So here, I'll explain this plot in a minute, but the overall conclusion is that our patients, the 20 that we administered this game to, did learn to perform this game well, and this performance was contingent on selectively attending to what was relevant around them and ignoring the rest. And we see this by plotting each of the games, each of the trials on the x-axis, and on the y-axis is their average correct choices overall across the game. Light green instructed is when we gave them a bit of a hint. So we said, pay attention to the shapes, ignore the colors. And then dark green is when we didn't give them that hint. And across both contexts, we see over time in the games, as people experience outcomes, they figure out what's relevant and start to ignore what's irrelevant. And then when we look at neural activity from regions in the prefrontal cortex, which are pretty well established to underlie concepts of attention and decision-making and planning, we found that activity in these regions related with how much attention people were paying to what they felt was relevant. But how do we decide what information is important when we don't always get a hint or a rule in our daily lives? So to test this hypothesis or answer this question, drawing on some work done with my colleagues at UCL during my master's research, and this was done with Professor Tali Sharrett, and we proposed a framework for how humans decide to seek or avoid information. And we hypothesized that this was based on some estimate of information's value, which is made up of estimates along 3 axes, and those are shown in the colors here. And that is an instrumental utility or value. So how much can this information be used to inform my future actions? A hedonic utility or value can be used interchangeably. And that is, how does it make me feel? Does it make me happy or sad? And then a cognitive utility. How much does it reduce my uncertainty? So this hypothesis, this framework proposes that people's decision to seek or attend to certain information is not based on just one component of it or one feature of it, but rather a weighted sum of value across these different characteristics of information. So to test this hypothesis, we again administered a game to participants. This time it was 60 online participants. And this was a card game, a lottery card game. So I'll walk through. Each screen is a screen of the game that our participants witnessed. So participants saw this lottery distribution, these 6 cards on any given trial. And they were told that if they decided to play the lottery to gamble on this round, one of these cards would be their actual take-home value. So it was made up of potential wins or losses. They then saw their likelihood, their agency in this lottery decision of getting to play the lottery or the computer making the choice. After this, they had the opportunity to purchase information about the lottery. If they decided to purchase information, we took some of the cards away. So we provided a little bit more context and information about what the most likely outcome if they decided to play the lottery in this round would be. And if they didn't purchase information, they had no further indication of what their outcome would be. Then they either got to play the lottery or the computer made the choice based on that likelihood that I showed before. And by administering this game, we were able to quantify information's value along the 3 axes that I mentioned and try to understand which were the best predictors of our samples' decisions to seek or avoid information. And as we hypothesized, we found that people were most likely to seek information when it contained high utility across all 3 axes. So when it made them feel good, when it reduced their uncertainty, and when they could use it to make better, more informed decisions going forward. And then follow-up work by my colleagues in the lab found that these motives for seeking certain information and avoiding others emerge from early childhood. So in summary, my current PhD work at Mount Sinai hones in on the idea that in order to make decisions in a world that has a lot going on and is demanding a lot of our attention, we must selectively attend to only some information and avoid others. But how do we decide what information to attend to? And this draws upon some of my findings from my master's work at UCL, where we proposed and tested that we decide what to attend to by considering how it makes us feel, how much it reduces our feelings of uncertainty, and how useful the information is to us. But information can only be quantified. We can only evaluate information if we understand the information. And to get at this, my colleagues and I at Mount Sinai are deeply interested in the role of effective science communication in performing impactful science and how this can be extended to different disciplines. So we proposed a framework where effective communicators must be accessible, accountable, and adaptable in sharing the specifics of their findings. And we took it a step further by proposing some techniques or methods for getting at each of these styles of communication more effectively. And this is based on a course that we offer at Mount Sinai. And this framework was actually recently published in a paper, which I can link to for anyone interested in similar training at your institution, which has been very impactful to students at Mount Sinai. And we thought this work was quite interesting because it really leverages the idea that you must communicate in a way that is readily accepted by your audience. And that's really how you drive the uptake and understanding of what you're sharing. So thank you for listening to my very brief talk. I wanted to acknowledge the work done at UCL, as I mentioned, with Professor Tali Sharrett, at Mount Sinai with Drs. Radulescu and Saez, and then also at the Villa Verde farm, I learned a tremendous amount in the living laboratory with Valentina. This QR code links to my website, in which I have links to the publications and research that I shared today, as well as some other additional resources, which I'm happy to discuss it on offline at any point. And then with that, I have some discussion questions, hopefully to inform our breakout rooms, and I'm very excited to hear from others.
I have a short request, Christina. Thank you very much for starters. It was very enlightening. Sorry. Could you please also share the link to your website here in the chat so we can record it for those who do not have access to a QR code reader at this moment?
Definitely.
Thank you very much.
I will stop my sharing. Oh, I can pop the questions as well in the chat if you need. I'm not sure the best way to share those.
That would be perfect. If you could also show it, maybe pull it up one more time so we can read through it. Because this is now, thank you so much also, Christina, from my side. You stayed perfectly in time. I'm impressed. So this gives us a full 15 minutes to discuss those questions that we're seeing now. And I'm sure we can definitely benefit from your insights from cognitive science for our work, where we try to improve our communication of our scientific insights to society, but also, I mean, our group really, I know a lot of people that showed up today, I know them, and I really know they care about making a difference also with the either research or the action work that they are doing. So yes, let's see, what can we discuss in those groups? What can we learn from your insights? How can we leverage findings from neuroscience to combat information overload and engage the public's attention to ensure meaningful engagement with our sustainability messages? So exactly this. So one group, group one, that you will be by randomly assigned to, will discuss this question. Christina, do you want to read out the other questions while I put together actually the breakout sessions?
So the second, what role does storytelling play in sustainability messaging? How can narrative structure enhance a message's effectiveness? This is kind of born out of the final thing I shared in terms of a framework for communicating. We propose communicating science, but as Valentina shared, it's communicating any specialized fields, findings, and work with the general public to stir up interest and attention. 3, how do cognitive neuroscience findings on attention, learning, and decision-making vary across cultural contexts? How can we adapt sustainability strategies accordingly? I thought this was important to include in both studies that I shared. That work was done in primarily English-speaking countries, individuals in primarily English-speaking countries, and it's very important to consider how these findings extrapolate to other contexts. What are examples of successful and unsuccessful sustainability campaigns? I was interested in discussing some of these and seeing if they appeal to different information-seeking motives. And then finally, how do we quantify a sustainability messaging campaign success? I'm very keen to learn for my cognitive science perspective about this. Obviously, we use different statistical frameworks to validate things. And I think that there's good and bad to be gleaned in different methodologies within subfields. And I'm curious how that would be quantified from other people's perspectives.
Mm. Yes, people are coming back. Fantastic. Can't wait to hear what happened in your breakout sessions. Yes, I think we are all back. Fantastic. So, what were the main insights from your discussions? And did you pick somebody who will quickly give us a 2-minute insight into the core points of your discussions that we can, so we can all benefit from each other's discussions? Who wants to go first?
I can go. I think I self-nominated by making notes. But I feel like we made a really nice full circle. Well, it was nice for my thought process. We thought that, thank you for the introduction. We thought for me, and there was some nods when I said this, it was really validating in the sense of we kind of know this stuff, but the fact that it's then rooted in some science to say, no, you know, what we observe, what we see, what we think, what we feel is actually kind of there in hard data. And we started by saying, you know, the story only works if it keeps you hooked in. And that's what we ended up cycling back round to was saying, do we have to think differently about what storytelling is? And so does it need to be more interactive so that you don't consume even those narratives as quickly as everything else is being consumed? So our appetite for everything is so fast. So if the story hooks you in, is interactive, and we touched on gamification and theatre and art and music and whatever else those things can be. And sorry, we were answering to the question around storytelling. We were saying also that many of the narratives that are out there just now are the narratives of the problem, the doom and gloom. And so people disconnect because we don't really want to know about that. So how do we give the solution-oriented stories? And Stefan, who was in our room, was saying, you know, story of a vision, I believe World War II, where the leadership was kind of using that opportunity to share the vision of the future, and everybody wanted to get out of a wartime situation, so followed the tips and tricks. Stefan, please correct me if I'm regaling this incorrectly, but wanted to follow those tips and tricks because they didn't want the situation they were in. The challenge we have now is most people are quite happy with the situation that we're in. They enjoy that sense of consumption, the instant gratification. So what is that other world? And then that kind of other world is, you know, so at the moment we connect consumption with happiness and good well-being. So can we create a narrative that is around less consumption equals a happy life? But also that less consumption presents another challenge because actually that requires us to think, maybe do a little bit more, and maybe go through the kind of path of least resistance a little bit more. And I think we were all reflecting a bit on our context of working in education, and how the culture even of education is training us to take the path of least resistance and go from A to B as quickly as possible. Do this assignment, finish this assignment, it's done, and you know, the quickest possible way. So even when our whole practices around us are kind of encouraging us to be as kind of least critical, what are the words to become? We were saying critical and not agile to then maybe thrive in this less consumer-driven environment. And so we did a full circle back into, you know, the freedom of choice. Who are we to challenge people's freedom of choice, and how do we reconcile with this idea, well, if my freedom of choice is impacting on somebody else's lack of choice or freedom, how do we bring this into a narrative, and how do we make the narrative somehow connect with individuals? That was probably more than 2 minutes, but we discussed a lot and it was really fruitful.
Yes, it was really fruitful. I'm impressed. You harvested a lot of olives here. In your case, I'm impressed. Thank you for this run through. And I'm sure that is also inspiring for some of the others. And maybe there were also some connection points, like were there similar insights? Who else wants to go next and share some of their reflections? It doesn't have to be all of don't feel under pressure to give such an full on summary. Don't be so shy. Who was in a different group? Who was not with Natalie?
I have a lot of background noise in here. Sorry about that, guys. But I think that our conversation was quite interesting also because we had the luxury of having Christina with us in the room. So she could also bring some of the topics that highlight some of the topics of her presentation. But we were talking about a lot about how the framing matters, like, you know, like what exactly is it that we are communicating, and some of the challenges that, for example, coming from this lab or experimental field into translating into, like, you know, implementation work. And we had with us two people that have been working in policy. So it was like these, I think one of the main takeaways is that reaching consensus is always a challenge, and that it is needed to have this participatory or reflective research, and at some point to see what happened. And that, yeah, like also something that we were discussing was that to determine how something was effective, we first need to be very clear about what is it that we're going to be measuring. Because sometimes it's like it's enough to have 5 likes, but at least we got some responses, right? So first, it's important to establish what is it that we want to measure to see whether it was effective or not. But please, Christina, Sylvia, Leonie, just yeah, you can add on what I said.
I think one thing that I found interesting is I kind of raised the point that I guess in our research studies, we can conclude, quote unquote, it's always just an effort towards information, never a full conclusion. But by essentially looking at like a critical mass, if there's an overall consensus in our sample who we studied, how did they behave on average? And then that's evidence, more statistical evidence for us. And I was wondering how that relates in different fields. And I thought it was interesting to hear Leonie mention that, and also Sylvie mentioned that it's kind of looking at a critical mass even when you're extrapolating and translating these findings, like how can we reach the most people rather than a niche group, is I think a quote from Sylvie. So I thought that was interesting to see how the way we approach the challenges and conclusions to our questions, at least intermediary conclusions, are kind of similar, even though the subject is different and the goal is different.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. Also raises the question of what is critical mass in the next actually step? Like there's different theories that speak of a 3.5% in each level of society that are needed to make a big shift in society. Historically, at least it was like that. So is that a critical mass, or is it like apparently you discussed the majority of a group? So very interesting. I also pulled up again I stole it quickly. I did a copy of one of your, I think, slides to that I think would be also great to keep as a documentation for the session today. But I know there's another group that also wants to show and present. But for those who joined later, I think I'll keep this in the background, and maybe the third group wants to say something to this as well, or had this in the background when discussing their question. Who was in the third group that hasn't presented their insights yet?
I can start. I was with Kira and Jeffrey, but I think that now that I am seeing this presentation at this slide, I see that we were talking about these points, for example, to give or to make the communication accessible to people to understand what we are talking about, and to try different ways to give this information. No, for example, in a visual way, or maybe more rational for people who is more rational. And I don't know the others if they want to share something. We were talking about politics, about marketing, about different things. I don't know if you...
Yeah. Do you want to share a bit more about the political aspects you discussed, or the marketing aspects?
I brought up the this presidential debate that happened last night between Biden and then Trump, which a different type of consumption, right, in terms of voting, like what kind of government do you want? But the difference between how Biden, in terms of delivery, in terms of presentation, Biden was stumbling. He wasn't paying attention to how he looked on camera, which was like depressed and looking away. He wasn't focused on the camera, where Trump was very much camera oriented. He was really projecting out to the camera and the audience with all his facial expressions, and his speech was, even though what he was talking about was incoherent and full of crazy lies and everything like that, but he was doing it so quickly. He acted like he was competent where he really wasn't. Whereas anyway, it was in the deliveries, like is speaking to the camera, being aware of how you appear, your voice. So much of it was just on that. It had nothing. And in terms of content, here Biden had all this content and facts and things, but it wasn't coming across at all. So it was about delivery.
Yeah, that's interesting that you're saying that. I don't know if you know probably Daniel Kahneman, who also won a Nobel Prize for economics, and with his and he's actually coming from a similar background as Christina. His book Thinking Fast and Slow was quite a big success, and one of the examples he gives is actually exactly what you just said, Jeffrey, is that most of the time the insights of cognitive science are very often either intuitively or strategically used by rather right-wing parties or populist political parties to actually kind of use those insights of how you can appeal to emotions, how you can use repetition, and because that sticks with people's attention, and unfortunately that can also be abused, those insights, as you also described just now. So yeah, maybe that is maybe a thing that I can recommend also reading, or I have it as an audiobook in a follow-up to this session today to listen to and reflect on how we can learn more from this interesting science, but also be aware of maybe become also more aware how it is used in different fields already, like politics, for example. Is there any more questions now that we're approaching the end of the session today to Christina that you want to ask? And then I will keep 1 minute to talk about a bit, like as I promised, make a comment on how this group is affiliated with SCORAI and Future Earth, and what could be next steps picking up the thread from today. Is there any more questions? No?
I'll just make a note that framework, Valentina, I'm glad you liked it and screenshotted it. It is part of a paper which I dropped the link to. If someone doesn't have access, I'm happy to email it. So feel free to email me and I can provide it to you. It gives some resources, like I said, if you wanted to create a full course around that framework at your institution or school. I see a question. Kira.
Thank you,
Hi,
Christina.
Christina. Thank you so much, and Valentina as well. I have a question regarding protection mechanisms when it comes to difficult topics. I learned that it's very often very difficult to make people like motivate when it comes to overwhelming stuff. And I wanted to ask you how could you help with the techniques and insight that you bring to help people maybe go that path and maybe motivate them and acknowledge about sustainability.
Yeah, so and all of the work was, I guess, more on the observational side where we didn't induce like a motivation to behave a certain way. We tried a study which didn't end up coming to fruition, but we induced like short-term stress, like told participants they were going to have to give a presentation in front of a room and then made them play that same lottery game. We were interested if under stressful conditions, you start to change your decision-making, maybe due to how much cognitive load you have. You can't really fully attend to all these different things. But again, we weren't trying to push or participants to respond a certain way. That wasn't really the goal of this work. So I guess we're more interested in just what is adaptive or naturalistic to people in terms of what makes them comfortable, and how can we just provide information in the world that is both understandable and maybe attuned to their interests, but not necessarily push people to engage with something that is just not something they want to engage with. In terms of some of the, not a little unrelated, but in terms of, I guess, how this work can become harmful when you get into ideas of like manipulating the ideas, manipulating the notion of how people seek information. My group at UCL has done a bunch of follow-up work on misinformation and how social media can be kind of changed to safeguard against these kind of influences. So if you look up the group, and there's some other follow-up work to see how we can safeguard, I guess, against the potential harms of it.
That sounds very interesting also to our NGO work. Thank you, Christina, for mentioning that, because we also do work with multipliers of schools and educators, and there's misinformation and social media is a big topic for them and in schools to sensitize youth as well on how to use social media critically. So I'm curious to learn more. Speaking of learning more, we would love, because we're coming to an end, we are actually already over time. And I know there is for sure a lot of more questions to Christina. So what can we do now? What are the next steps? How can we stay in touch? How can we deepen some of these initial discussions that we've started today? We were thinking that it would be fantastic if we could do a very easy first step, which is connect with each other on LinkedIn. We will share the recording of this session. We can share. You can write us to actually sign up to get the invitations to this working group, which meets regularly 4 times a year. You can become active also in designing the next sessions. So you have like a mini possibility as a next step, which is to connect on LinkedIn with the people here, write down the names, take a screenshot yourself, connect with us so we can share with you the recording and all the information. And then the maxi version of next steps would be cross-pollinate for real, further develop the aspects of our discussion together today. I know there's a lot of inputs, but it's also amazing that we had such an intense discussion in such a short time, which is also related to this breakout session format that we try to do in every meeting. Speaking of the meetings, next quarter we'll have our next meeting with Ashley Colby, talking about climate education and how different approaches can help to reach young people and mobilize them for climate action. And yes, as I promised, I have one more slide to share, which is how is this all coming together? For those who don't know our group, we are connected to 2 bigger networks, which is on the one side, on the left side, the SCORAI Global Sustainable Consumption Research and Action Initiative, which is an international knowledge network of researchers and practitioners. Committed to building a flourishing, ecologically sound society. And then Future Earth community, and you can see we are one of 27 global research networks, our group. So we are connected to those. You see 27 of those networks, and we are the one here, the SSCP communicating group. And yeah, I just want to invite you again to stay in touch with with us. This is our email address, and maybe one of my colleagues can also put it in the chat, so you can reach out to us and sign up for the invite to our next sessions. Yeah, having said all that, thank you for staying online a little bit longer. Thank you for Christina so much for sharing your insights. It's so nice we have put it into practice, this cross-pollination across disciplines. It was the first time that we had someone from cognitive science with us. And Natalie, thank you for sharing our Coconuts Connected email address. Yeah. Thank you all for being here today from all parts of the world, and hoping to see you soon, either on LinkedIn or in the next working group session. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and don't give up in communicating sustainable lifestyles. It's the only way. Bye.
Wherever you are, enjoy the summer, enjoy the
Bye.
winter break.
Yes. See you again in September.
See you in September.